Most people believe that childhood is simply a phase of life, something to be passed through and then left behind. A drawer of old memories, faded photographs, wounds either healed or quietly ignored, and behaviors that adulthood is supposed to erase. But I came to see a truth that overturns this comfortable idea entirely. Within every adult, a child is still living. And I do not mean a symbolic memory or a faint echo of the past. I mean a real psychic presence, a living archetype that goes on working silently inside the adult mind, shaping your thoughts, sabotaging your decisions, distorting your relationships, and quietly building whole identities around its needs. This inner figure, which I called the archetypal child, is not asleep. It is not waiting patiently to be forgotten. It is an active force, deep and largely unconscious, and it carries two things at once: the purest qualities of a human being, the creativity, the sensitivity, the capacity for wonder, and also the oldest and deepest of wounds: abandonment, rejection, humiliation, the feeling of never having been seen. In my years of clinical work, I came to believe that most adult suffering begins precisely here, in the repression of this inner child. Rather than turning toward it, caring for it, giving it a place, we learn to hide it. We cover it with masks of maturity, with our social roles, our clever rationalizations, sometimes our vices. And for this concealment, we pay a heavy price: anxiety that never lifts, existential crises, a dependence on others we cannot explain, a persistent sense of emptiness, and the endless repetition of patterns that wound us again and again. Because here is what almost no one understands. This child does not disappear simply because you have ignored it. The more you deny it, the more it forces its way out in the shadows, in disguised and disordered forms. The adult who flares into fury at the smallest criticism, the one who feels invisible in every relationship, the one who cannot stop seeking approval from those in authority, the one who can never draw a clear boundary. These people are not being childish in the way the word is usually thrown around. They are simply being governed by a wounded child that has never once been seen or understood. And here lies the most delicate and most powerful point of all. This child does not need to be healed as though it were a defect to be corrected. It needs to be recognized. It needs a real and legitimate place inside you. True psychological growth does not come from denying the inner child, but from developing what I called the inner parent, the ability to care for yourself from within, to open a dialogue between the wounded part of you and the part that can protect it. This is where real maturity begins, not in repressing your pain, but in listening to it, not in pretending to be strong, but in slowly building something solid. So this is an invitation to return to a forgotten part of yourself. The answer to why you feel so tired, so lost, so endlessly in need, was never out there in the world. It was always within you, small, sensitive, and until now, invisible. For me, archetypes are not abstract ideas or pretty metaphors. They are living psychic structures, dwelling in the collective unconscious, shaping our behavior and our feelings with a force that runs deeper than reason. And among them, few strike with the power of the inner child. What I identified was not a wistful memory of being young. It was an active psychological presence, a center of emotional energy that remains within you no matter how many years have passed. This child is not trapped back in the past. It lives in the present, in your reactions, in your desires, in your most irrational fears, in the very way you relate to other people. When we speak of the inner child, most people picture scenes from their early years, but I meant something far deeper. The child is a symbol of the self still forming. It stands at the very beginning of the long journey of becoming whole, and it holds the potential for everything you have not yet become. It is at once vulnerable and sacred. Within it lives the source of your spontaneity, your curiosity, your creativity, and also your deepest wounds, your unhealed traumas, your oldest feelings of helplessness, of shame, of having been left behind. When this child is ignored, it makes itself known through reactions that seem far too large for the moment. Sudden emotional outbursts, irrational insecurity, the fear of being abandoned, the constant hunger for approval, the inability to bear criticism or frustration. Many adults live their entire lives steered by this wounded child. Even those who hold positions of power, who have built families, who wear a public face of success. The inner child has no respect for your status. It only wants to be heard. This archetype is also strangely double in its nature. It can be the bridge to your healing or the source of your deepest imbalance. When you integrate it, you reconnect with creativity, with intuition, with a certain lightness. When you repress it, you sabotage everything you try to build. This is why I saw the child as one of the most important figures in the whole of the unconscious. To ignore it, I came to feel, is to amputate a part of your own soul. And any attempt at growth that refuses this reconnection is doomed before it begins. But not every inner child wears the same face. I observed that it appears in different forms, with different needs and different distortions. Some take control in silence, others scream for attention. But all of them shape us. And to understand how, we must look at its different faces. If this is reaching something in you, subscribe to this channel so the rest of this journey can find you. I did not stop at simply naming the presence of the inner child. In my clinical work, I saw that this archetype takes on several expressions within the adult, each with its own needs, its own strengths, its own distortions. These are not rigid boxes, but patterns that flow into one another, forming the hidden foundation of how we behave. And to recognize them is to understand where our most automatic and most painful reactions are truly coming from. The first is the wounded child. It carries the traumas, the ones spoken and the ones never spoken. Abandonment, rejection, emotional neglect, violence, whether of the body or of the spirit. The steady invalidation of its feelings. This is the child who learned, often very early, that to express a need was dangerous, that to ask for attention was humiliating, that to trust was to invite pain. When it goes unintegrated, it surfaces in the adult as a fear of closeness, as chronic anxiety, as relationships built on dependency, as a constant watchfulness, as the inability to trust, and as an emptiness that no achievement on earth can fill. It is this child who makes you react to a small criticism as if your very existence were under attack, who feels rejection where there is none, who repeats again and again the old act of abandoning yourself. The second is the eternal child. While the wounded child lives in the past, this one lives in escape. It is the part of us that refuses to grow up, to take on responsibility, to bear any frustration. It chases after constant novelty, immediate pleasure, admiration without effort, and it holds a deep fear of limits, of commitment, of anything that might bind it. In the adult, it shows itself as endless procrastination, as relationships that never settle, as a hatred of routine, as the inability to build anything that lasts, as the feeling that being a grown adult is a kind of prison. I never saw this as a moral failing. I saw it as a sign that the bright, vital energy of childhood had simply never found a mature place to live. The third is the divine child. This one holds the deepest creative, spiritual, and intuitive potential in a human being. It is the part of you that still believes in the mystery of existence, that feels life as something sacred and full of possibility. It is the source of your insight, your genuine compassion, your capacity to be amazed. But in a cruel irony, this child is so often smothered beneath the pain of the other two. With no room to come forward, it withdraws and grows unreachable, leaving the adult cut off from their own creativity and from any real sense of purpose. I believe that most people live, above all, under the rule of the wounded child, meeting the world from a place of emotional lack, of mere survival. We look to our romantic partners to become the parents we never had. We take every criticism as a personal rejection. We build, without knowing it, the same patterns that played out in our childhood. This is not a sign of weakness. It is the plain manifestation of a powerful archetype working without your awareness. And the moment you can name which of these children has taken charge, you have taken the first step toward reclaiming your own inner life. But to do that, we must first see how, from the earliest age, we were taught to hide this child behind our roles and our masks. From very young, we learn that certain feelings are not welcome, that to feel too much is weak, that crying is ugly, that to need others is shameful, that being too sensitive is a flaw. And so, across the years, this emotional schooling, built on repression and quiet punishment, teaches us to put on masks. Masks of strength, of control, of independence, of maturity. We construct a socially acceptable self, designed to please, to function, to avoid being rejected. But this self is so often an empty shell, raised on the steady denial of the child still living inside. I observed that this suppression of the inner child, carried out in the name of being mature, is one of the central sources of modern psychological suffering. Repression does not erase pain, it only moves it. What the conscious mind refuses, the unconscious keeps. Anger pushed down becomes anxiety. A need ignored becomes a compulsion. Vulnerability stifled returns as addiction, as self-sabotage, as illness in the body. Instead of healing our wounds, we become experts at hiding them. These masks take many shapes. There is the mask of the responsible one, who is forever caring for everyone else and never for themselves, often driven by a child who learned that love had to be earned through usefulness. There is the mask of the strong and untouchable, who needs no one, who never weeps, who solves everything alone, but whose inner child was forced to grow up far too fast. And there is the mask of the successful one, who achieves and performs and impresses, yet lives exhausted, forever trying to prove their worth to parents who perhaps never truly saw them at all. These masks are unconscious attempts to win a little safety in a world that once punished our tenderness. But every one of them carries us further from who we really are. A gap opens between your authentic self and the self you show, and the wider that gap grows, the deeper the emptiness becomes. An emptiness you then try to fill with consumption, with distraction, with relationships that numb you, even with a shallow kind of spirituality. But none of these can stand in for the truth of the psyche. The inner child does not vanish with time. It waits. It waits to be recognized, to be heard, to be held. And while that does not happen, it goes on sabotaging your life, not out of malice, but because it is the only language it has ever known for getting your attention. Many people spend whole decades in this cycle, ignoring the child in the name of maturity, and harvesting in return a depleted inner life, shallow relationships, and the same crisis returning again and again. They are certain they need to be stronger, more productive, more rational, when in truth what is missing is the opposite: sensitivity, listening, presence. What is missing is someone inside them able to care for the child that was never cared for. And that figure, the one who can finally do this, I called the inner parent. The part of your psyche that can become for you the father or mother you never had. If the inner child is a living force within you, the question becomes how to live alongside it without being ruled by its wounds. And my answer is at once deep and surprisingly practical. It is not to repress the child, but to grow within yourself an adult who knows how to care for it. This inner parent functions like an internal mother and father, able to hold, to protect, and to offer the wounded child what the outer world never gave. Emotional maturity, despite what so many believe, is not about leaving the inner child behind. It is about building a relationship with it. And that asks for something few have ever truly developed: a conscious willingness to welcome yourself. The inner parent is the capacity to become an observer of your own self, to notice when the wounded child has taken control, and rather than lashing out or shoving the feeling back down, to open an inner dialogue instead, to say within yourself, I see your pain. I am here. I will not leave you. And this simple inner stance changes everything. Imagine an ordinary moment. Someone criticizes you or turns you away. You feel a reaction far larger than the situation deserves. Anger, a wave of sadness, a sudden urge to disappear and shut yourself away. Instead of merely reacting, the inner parent steps forward. It recognizes that it is not the adult who is suffering, but the wounded child, reliving in that instant some old pain of being abandoned or dismissed. And in that recognition, the whole inner dynamic shifts. You move from reacting blindly to caring for yourself with intention. This is the very heart of real maturity. It is not about becoming cold or distant or numb to your emotions, which is what so many mistake for being an adult. It is the exact opposite. It is developing a kind of inner presence that can hold pain without being swallowed by it. To be, at the same time, the child who feels and the adult who cares. This integration is what turns a fragmented psyche into a whole one. But it does not arrive through understanding alone. The inner parent must be cultivated with practice, with intention, and above all, with a commitment to your own emotional truth. And I will say this plainly, as a physician as much as anything else. Where the wounds run deep, where there is real trauma, or something like an addiction taking hold, this inner work belongs beside the care of a good therapist or doctor, not in place of it. Reading, reflection, and honest therapy all help, and they work hand in hand with the quiet, daily labor of learning to be, for yourself, what a good parent is for a sensitive child. This brings us to the work itself, the one I came to see as truly transformative. Most believe that time heals the wounds of childhood, that to grow up, to become independent, to gain your autonomy, is enough to leave the past behind. But the truth is harder. Time heals nothing that continues to be ignored. The wounds of the inner child remain open, not somewhere in your memory, but in your body, in your relationships, in your automatic reactions, in the patterns that pass down from one generation to the next. And so the path is this: to become, consciously, the adult you needed when you were small. This is not about returning to the past, or reliving your traumas without end, or drowning in lament. It is about building, now, in the present, a real relationship with the most sensitive and wounded part of yourself, and doing for it what those who raised you, through their own limitation or ignorance or pain, were never able to do. It means offering it emotional truth, a sense of inner safety, clear boundaries, and above all, permission to exist exactly as it is. This work begins with listening, a deep listening, not the intellectual kind that tries to explain pain with logic, but the emotional kind that simply holds what rises without trying to fix it. Because the inner child does not want to be fixed, it wants to be recognized. It wants to know that its pain makes sense, that its fear was never madness, that its need for love was never too much. The reparented adult is not the one who has become invulnerable. It is the one who has learned to hold their own vulnerability without betraying themselves. This also means setting boundaries within. So often, the inner child reaches out to others for what the conscious adult has not yet learned to give. It looks for protection in relationships that harm it, for validation in the eyes of strangers, for love in bonds where it must make itself small to be accepted. To say no to these impulses is not to reject the child, it is to protect it. It is to say, you no longer need to beg for love. I am here. I take care of you now. And it asks for the practice of steadying your own emotions, learning to calm yourself, to stay present in a moment of crisis, to comfort yourself without reaching for some compulsion or some escape. These are small acts, and they are powerful. To stop and breathe when the anxiety rises, to write to yourself as though you were consoling a real, frightened child, to step away from what is poisoning you, even when it hurts to go. Each of these sends a quiet but unmistakable message into the unconscious. I will not abandon you anymore. And over time, something very deep begins to change. The wounded child stops screaming, because at last it is being heard. The impulsive reactions soften, because now there is an adult present, in command. Your relationships begin to change, because the emptiness no longer demands to be filled at any cost. And the energy that was locked away in your defenses and your repetitions begins to move freely again. And with it returns your creativity, your sensitivity, and the genuine desire to live. This is the heart of true healing, not the erasing of the past, but the building of a present in which the old pain is finally met with acceptance. And there is something even greater that happens when this child is no longer carried as a burden, but begins to be recognized as a guide. It transforms. After years, sometimes after decades, when the inner child is finally heard, the pain that once showed itself as chronic anxiety, as compulsions, as ruined relationships, as a bottomless emptiness, begins slowly to dissolve. And what emerges in its place is not only relief, it is a kind of power. Not an aggressive power, not a performance, but a quiet strength that rises from your reconnection with the parts of yourself you had exiled. When this child is no longer treated as a problem, but recognized as an essential part of who you are, it stops working in the shadows. It no longer needs to sabotage your life to be noticed. It no longer needs to cry out inside you every time someone rejects you, or criticizes you, or looks past you. Because now it knows it is not alone. There is an adult there, present, protecting, available. An adult who learned to love not because anyone taught them, but because they chose not to repeat the abandonment. And at this point, something almost miraculous occurs. Pain gives way to creativity. Lack makes room for real connection. Anxiety becomes presence. When the inner child finally feels safe, it reveals its highest face, the divine child, the one who is not afraid to feel, to create, to explore, to be enchanted by the world, the one who carries within it the deepest meaning of your life. I always said that the child is a symbol of wholeness, and when it is integrated, the human being stops living in fragments, torn between the mask and the shadow, between what is shown to the world and what suffers in silence. True freedom begins when you no longer have to fight against yourself. when you no longer need a mask in order to deserve love, nor have to shrink in order to be accepted. When you become, at last, the very home you spent your whole life searching for in other people. This is the turning point. And it does not come from outside you, not from courses, not from relationships, not from empty promises. It comes from the single radical act of turning inward with courage and saying to the child who has waited so long, I see you. I am here for you. I will not abandon you any more. This is the beginning of a different life. A life that is more whole, more true, and far lighter. A life in which you no longer have to merely survive. A life in which you can, finally, begin to live. So tell me in the comments, when was the moment in your life that your inner child most needed someone to be there? Say it in your own words, because your story may reach someone else who is walking the same difficult road, and let them know they are not alone on it. And stay for the next video. This inner journey does not end here, and there is more of it still to walk. And your becoming does not stop on this page.